I was exactly 39 weeks and 6 days pregnant when my husband stepped carefully over a puddle of my amniotic fluid just to grab his brand new designer carry-on luggage. He tossed a crumpled $50 bill onto our kitchen island and told me to take an Uber to the hospital because his parents had booked a non-refundable luxury trip to the Maldives. I stayed completely silent as the front door clicked shut. But the next day, when he called me in an absolute panic from the other side of the world, begging for me to fix the massive disaster he had just walked into, I delivered a single sentence that shattered his perfect vacation. That is the price you pay. My name is Lauren. I am 33 years old and I work as a senior forensic accountant for a major financial firm. Before I tell you how I systematically dismantled my husband's entire life from my maternity recovery bed, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe that true karma always collects its debts in the end. The sharp, blinding pain of a contraction ripped through my abdomen with the force of a freight train, forcing me to lean my entire body weight against the cold marble edge of the kitchen island. I gripped the countertop so hard my knuckles turned white, trying to remember the breathing techniques from the birthing classes I had attended completely alone. The house was dead quiet except for my ragged breathing and the distinct metallic click of a suitcase handle being extended. Brandon, my husband of 5 years, walked into the kitchen wearing his tailored linen traveling clothes, looking ready for a magazine photo shoot. He paused, looking down at the hardwood floor, where my water had just broken a minute earlier. Instead of rushing to my side, instead of dropping everything to support his wife, who was clearly going into active labor, he simply frowned. He lifted his expensive luggage high off the ground, stepping awkwardly around the puddle so he would not ruin the soles of his brand new leather loafers. He did not ask if I was okay or how far apart the contractions were. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a single crumpled $50 bill, and tossed it carelessly onto the counter beside my pre-packed hospital bag. I stared at him through a haze of physical agony and absolute disbelief. My mind struggled to process what was happening right in front of me. Brandon checked his heavy gold watch, a gift his mother had bought him for his recent promotion as a real estate project manager. He let out a long, dramatic sigh, sounding more like a man inconvenienced by heavy traffic than a father about to meet his firstborn child. He delivered his next words without even bothering to make eye contact with me. "You will be fine, Lauren. My parents booked this Maldives trip 6 months ago. It is a once-in-a-lifetime deal. And the tickets are completely non-refundable. I cannot just back out now and ruin their vacation. Just call an Uber to take you to the hospital. There will be doctors and nurses there to handle everything anyway. That is literally their job. My dad is already waiting in the driveway and my mom is complaining about missing our pre-flight drinks in the airport lounge. I really have to go. I will make it up to you when I get back in 2 weeks." There was no hesitation in his voice, and absolutely no apologies for abandoning his wife and unborn child. He simply grabbed his sunglasses, adjusted his collar, and turned his back on me. Most women would have screamed at the top of their lungs in that moment. Most women would have collapsed onto the floor sobbing hysterically, begging the universe to explain why the man they loved could be so profoundly cruel and heartless. But I did not shed a single tear. The pain radiating through my lower back was intense, yet my mind suddenly became crystal clear. As a forensic accountant, I spend my days tracking hidden assets, untangling complicated webs of corporate deceit, and dismantling fraudulent financial empires brick by brick. Panic is simply not in my professional vocabulary. I watched in absolute freezing silence as he pulled his luggage over the threshold and pulled the front door shut behind him. A moment later, I heard the heavy thud of his father's vehicle doors closing, followed by the loud crunch of gravel as they sped away toward the airport. I was entirely alone in the empty house. I reached out with a trembling hand, picked up the $50 bill he had thrown at me like I was some sort of burden, and slipped it into the side pocket of my hospital bag. Then I pulled out my phone and ordered a ride. The ride to the medical center felt like a surreal blur of flashing streetlights and agonizing pain. The driver, an older gentleman with incredibly kind eyes, kept glancing at me nervously through the rearview mirror, clearly terrified I was going to deliver my baby in the back seat of his car. I focused entirely on my breathing, gripping the plastic handle above the door to keep myself anchored to reality. Seeking any kind of distraction from the relentless contractions tearing through my body, I unlocked my phone screen and opened our family group chat. I wanted to see if anyone in his family felt any remorse for pulling him away from the birth of his first child. What I saw waiting for me in those text messages erased any lingering trace of love I had left for my husband and his family. It was the final, undeniable proof that I needed to execute a plan that would leave them with absolutely nothing. I opened the messaging app and navigated to the in-law family group chat. The screen illuminated the darkened back seat of the car, revealing a fresh exchange that made my blood run entirely cold. There, at the very bottom of the thread, was a message from my mother-in-law, Brenda, sent just moments after they had pulled out of my driveway. The text read perfectly clear against the bright background. "Thank God you got away, Brandon. Pregnant women are always so incredibly dramatic and exhausting to deal with. This luxury trip is exactly what you need to relax and recharge your batteries before you are permanently tied down by a screaming infant and Lauren's constant complaining." My eyes scanned the cruel words, absorbing the sheer malice dripping from every syllable. But the true gut punch did not come from Brenda. It came from the immediate response directly below her text. Brandon, my husband, the man who had promised to protect and love me, had simply replied to his mother's vicious message with a laughing face emoji, followed by a brief text of his own. "I know, Mom." Crisis averted. "I cannot wait to hit the beach and finally have some peace and quiet." I stared at the screen as another brutal contraction washed over me. He was not just leaving me behind out of cowardice or a misguided sense of obligation to his parents. He was actively mocking my pain. He was laughing at the fact that I was currently enduring the terrifying ordeal of childbirth entirely alone, while he jetted off to a tropical paradise. The glowing screen felt like a physical slap to the face, but it was exactly the wake-up call I needed. Despite the blinding physical agony tearing through my abdomen, my analytical mind kicked into high gear. As a forensic auditor, I was trained to look at the cold, hard facts and strip away the emotional noise to find the truth hiding beneath the surface. The facts of my marriage were suddenly glaringly obvious. For years, I had constantly excused Brenda's passive-aggressive insults about my blue-collar working-class background. I had forced myself to smile politely when she made snide remarks about how my relatives lacked sophistication, or when my father-in-law, Gary, made blatant demanding comments about needing loans for his failed business ventures. Brandon had always played the role of the helpless, obedient son, claiming he just wanted to keep the peace and avoid rocking the boat. I had always given him the benefit of the doubt, believing he was just caught in a difficult position between his demanding parents and his wife. Now, looking at that laughing emoji, the absolute truth was undeniable. I was never a beloved member of their family. To Brenda and Gary, I was merely a convenient financial asset, a highly lucrative bank account used to elevate their lifestyle and fund their delusions of grandeur. To Brandon, I was nothing more than an incubator for his legacy and a comfortable safety net he could easily discard the moment things became too difficult or inconvenient. They viewed my hard-earned success and my money as their rightful property while treating my basic human needs as an irritating burden. The intense pain of labor was suddenly overshadowed by a much sharper realization. I had married a parasite who was raised by parasites, and it was time to cut them off permanently. As the Uber finally pulled up to the brightly lit emergency room entrance of the hospital, my driver rushed around to open my door with a look of sheer panic on his face. The nurses were already rushing out with a wheelchair, having been alerted by the driver as we approached the drop-off zone. I eased myself into the chair, gripping the armrests, as the hospital staff began wheeling me quickly through the automatic doors. Before they could ask me a barrage of intake questions or demand to see my insurance information, I held up a hand to pause them. I pulled up my contacts list and dialed the only person in the world I knew would drop everything to stand by my side. My younger sister Nicole answered on the second ring. I did not waste time on pleasantries or breakdowns. I delivered the information with the crisp, precise efficiency of an executive running a boardroom meeting. Nicole, I need you to listen to me carefully. I am at the emergency room right now. I am in active labor and the contractions are coming fast. Brandon is not here. He packed his bags and left for the Maldives with Brenda and Gary a few minutes ago. I need you and Andre here immediately. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line as Nicole processed the sheer audacity of my husband's betrayal. Then I heard the sharp intake of her breath, followed by the deep, rumbling voice of her husband Andre in the background asking what was wrong. Andre was a towering, incredibly protective African-American man who owned a highly successful chain of auto repair shops across the city. When our parents passed away years ago, Andre stepped up and became the fierce protective wall between Nicole and the rest of the world. He treated me like his own blood, and I knew his reaction to this news would be explosive. I could hear Nicole quickly relaying the information to him, and the immediate string of furious profanities that followed. "We are on our way, Lauren," Nicole said, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and protective rage. "Do not worry about anything else. We will be there in 20 minutes and Andre is already grabbing his keys." I hung up the phone and handed my ID to the admitting nurse, finally allowing myself to be rolled into the brightly lit chaos of the labor and delivery ward. The battle lines were drawn. I had barely settled into my delivery room and endured the initial fetal monitoring when the double doors flew open. True to her word, Nicole arrived in under 20 minutes, sprinting through the hospital corridors with an absolute frantic desperation that immediately brought a wave of comfort to my isolated heart. Right on her heels was my brother-in-law, Andre. Standing 6 feet 3 inches tall, with remarkably broad shoulders and an imposing physical presence, Andre completely filled the doorway. As a highly successful African-American entrepreneur who had built an empire of premium auto repair shops from the ground up, he commanded immediate respect whenever he walked into a room. More importantly, though, he possessed a fiercely protective nature regarding anyone he considered his true family. When our parents passed away, he had taken his vows to protect and cherish my younger sister to an entirely different level, extending that unwavering loyalty to me as well. Seeing them burst into the sterile clinical environment of the maternity ward, I felt a sudden overwhelming surge of relief. The terrifying isolation of facing childbirth completely alone vanished the second Nicole rushed to my bedside, grabbing my hand tightly in both of hers. Her face was flushed from running, and her eyes scanned me anxiously, searching for any signs of immediate distress. Behind her, Andre stood like an impenetrable fortress, surveying the medical equipment and making sure the nursing staff was treating me with the utmost priority. He placed a heavy, comforting hand on my shoulder, projecting a quiet strength that grounded me through the escalating pain. I did not need Brandon. I had my real family right here, and they were the only true support system I would ever genuinely need. The moment the attending nurse finished checking my vitals and briefly stepped out of the room to review my chart, the carefully contained tension inside Andre finally snapped. Nicole turned to him, her voice trembling with disbelief as she recounted the exact details of what I had told her on the phone during their drive over. She explained how Brandon had casually tossed a single crumpled bill onto the kitchen counter, how he had complained about his parents missing their pre-flight cocktails, and how he had deliberately chosen a luxury resort vacation over witnessing the birth of his own child. Upon hearing the full scope of what Brandon did, the veins in Andre's neck visibly bulged and his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. He turned away from my bed and paced toward the far end of the small hospital room, his heavy work boots striking the linoleum floor with terrifying force. For a split second, I genuinely thought he was going to punch a massive dent straight into the hospital waiting room wall, just to release the explosive anger radiating from his massive frame. He stopped and took a deep, ragged breath, fighting to keep his explosive temper in check for my sake. He turned back to face me, his dark eyes blazing with a protective fury that was both intimidating and deeply reassuring. "Give me the word, Lauren." Andre growled, his voice rumbling from deep within his chest with a suppressed rage that vibrated through the tiny room. "I know exactly which terminal his international flight departs from. I will call my guys who run security at the airport right now. I will have them halt his departure line, and I will drive down there myself to drag his cowardly ass straight off that tarmac. I will march him back here by his designer collar so he can face you and face the absolute disgrace of what he has done. Do not let him get away with this kind of ultimate betrayal. Just give me the green light and I swear to you, I will handle him." His offer was incredibly tempting. The thought of Brandon being publicly humiliated and forcefully removed from his luxurious getaway in front of his arrogant parents offered a fleeting flash of immense satisfaction. The image of Gary and Brenda watching their precious golden boy being physically dragged back to reality was incredibly enticing. But my analytical brain immediately intervened, overriding the temporary desire for a loud, dramatic physical confrontation. I slowly tightened my absolutely firm grip on the cold metal of the hospital bed rails, anchoring myself against another intense wave of very severe pelvic pain. My face was pale from the physical exertion of labor, but my eyes remained entirely sharp-focused and completely devoid of any useless tears. I looked directly into my brother-in-law's furious gaze. "No, Andre," I said, my voice dropping to a low, terrifyingly calm register that immediately commanded his full attention. "Let him board that flight. Let him drink his champagne and let him fly exactly as far away as possible. The further away he is from this city, the harder the eventual fall will be. I do not want him dragged back here kicking and screaming just to pretend he gives a damn about his son. I want him entirely stranded. I want his financial and personal ruin to be an absolute inescapable trap." Andre paused, his broad shoulders relaxing slightly as he registered the sheer cold calculation in my words. He looked at me closely, recognizing the extremely dangerous calm of a senior forensic accountant, who was already mentally auditing and dismantling her enemy's entire existence. He knew my professional capabilities better than anyone, and he understood exactly what my tone implied. I was not playing a game of petty revenge. I was initiating a systematic total destruction of my husband's privileged reality. A slow, respectful grin spread across Andre's face, replacing his earlier explosive fury. He recognized the shift in my demeanor and nodded his head in absolute unwavering solidarity. "Whatever you need," he stated, stepping back to take his position as my dedicated guardian at the heavy wooden door. "I am perfectly ready now." The next 14 hours tested every physical and mental limit I possessed. Labor is a grueling, brutal marathon under the best of circumstances, but enduring it without the man who helped create the life inside you adds a profound psychological weight to every single contraction. The sterile white walls of the delivery room seemed to close in as the sun set and rose again, marking the agonizing, slow passage of time. Through it all, my incredible sister Nicole never left my side for a single second. She wiped the cold sweat from my forehead with a damp cloth, fed me ice chips when my throat went completely dry, and held my hand so tightly her own knuckles turned white. She whispered fierce, continuous words of encouragement, drowning out the deafening silence left by my absent husband. Just outside the heavy delivery room door, Andre stood absolute guard like a stone sentinel. He managed the hospital staff with his commanding physical presence, ensuring that doctors and nurses attended to my every medical need without delay. Whenever I opened my eyes between the blinding waves of pain, I could see his tall, broad frame pacing the hallway or stepping inside to hand Nicole fresh water. He shielded me from the chaotic, busy hospital environment, making sure I felt entirely safe and protected. The physical absence of Brandon was completely eclipsed by the overwhelming, undeniable love of the real family who actually showed up for me. Finally, after 14 hours of sheer physical exhaustion and relentless pushing, the harsh fluorescent lights of the room brightened, and the sharp, piercing cry of my newborn son echoed loudly through the delivery ward. The doctor placed his warm, fragile body directly on my chest, and time simply stopped. He was perfectly healthy, beautifully tiny, and entirely mine. The tears I had stubbornly refused to shed over my husband's cowardly departure flowed freely, now falling softly into the fine, dark hair of my beautiful baby boy. As the medical staff quietly finished their required checks and slowly cleared out the room, transformed into a sanctuary of profound peace. The chaotic machinery noise faded into the background, leaving only the soft, rhythmic sounds of my son breathing against my collarbone. The space was remarkably quiet and full of absolute, unconditional love from my true family. Nicole sat on the edge of my hospital bed, gently stroking the baby's tiny fingers, while Andre stood at the foot of the mattress, looking down at us with a proud, fiercely protective smile. There was no stress, no passive-aggressive remarks from my arrogant in-laws, and no performative fake affection from Brandon. It was just pure, honest connection. But despite the incredible warmth of the moment, a lingering, heavy sense of finality hung in the air. Andre pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, his expression turning completely solemn. He looked at me and silently asked for permission to make one final attempt. He wanted to call Brandon, just to give him one last, singular chance to be a real father, to do the right thing, and answer the phone for his recovering wife and newborn son. I gave a slow, exhausted nod. Andre walked over to the large window overlooking the busy city streets and dialed the number. The hospital room was so incredibly quiet that I could hear the faint ringing through the phone speaker. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then abruptly clicked over to the automated voicemail system. Brandon clearly had his international roaming turned on, but actively chose to swipe away the incoming call. Andre aggressively ended the connection, his jaw tightening, and slipped the device back into his pocket without saying a single word. He did not need to speak. The rejection was incredibly loud, crystal clear, and completely deliberate. Brandon had absolutely made his ultimate choice, permanently prioritizing a selfish luxury vacation over the very first precious hours of his only child's brand new life. Exactly 1 hour later, the harsh, vibrating buzz of a social media notification shattered the hard-won tranquility of the hospital room. My phone illuminated on the bedside table, drawing my immediate attention. I reached over, carefully supporting my sleeping son with one arm, and picked up the device. It was a Facebook notification alerting me to a new post from Brandon. I tapped the screen and felt the remaining warmth in my body instantly turn to ice. There, displayed in high definition, was a brightly lit, geotagged selfie taken at an exclusive beachfront lounge in the Maldives. Brandon was front and center, wearing designer sunglasses and holding a massive frosted margarita. On either side of him stood Brenda and Gary, raising their own cocktail glasses toward the camera with wide, carefree smiles. The pristine, sparkling turquoise ocean stretched out perfectly behind them, mocking the sterile walls of my recovery room. The caption underneath the photo was a masterclass in narcissistic cruelty. It read, "Made it to paradise. Cannot wait to unplug and relax for the next 2 weeks. Has the baby come yet?" I stared at the bright screen, reading the words over and over again. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not care about the grueling physical trauma I had just endured. He treated the birth of his own flesh and blood son as a minor, inconvenient afterthought, completely tacked onto the very end of an arrogant public luxury vacation brag. I looked at the smiling faces of the people who had exploited my finances and disrespected my existence for years. Any lingering trace of grief completely vanished from my heart, replaced by a cold, calculated clarity. I pressed the side power button and securely locked my phone, tossing it right back onto the small table. The time for sorrow, weeping, and playing the role of the victim was officially over forever. The systematic financial operation to totally destroy his entire privileged life had officially begun. At exactly 6 in the morning, the pale dawn light filtered through the horizontal blinds of the hospital recovery room. The chaotic energy of the previous night had completely settled into a heavy clinical silence. My newborn son was resting peacefully in his clear plastic bassinet, wrapped tightly in a swaddle blanket, with his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, calming rhythm. I sat upright in the hospital bed, ignoring the sharp sting of my physical recovery. Nicole was sleeping in the uncomfortable vinyl recliner in the corner of the room, with a thin hospital blanket pulled up to her chin. Andre had stepped out an hour earlier to check on his auto shops and bring us back decent coffee and hot breakfast. I took a deep, stabilizing breath and looked over at my sister. "Nicole," I said softly, breaking the quiet stillness of the room. She stirred immediately, rubbing her eyes and sitting up with a worried expression. "What is it, Lauren? Are you in pain? Do you need the nurse?" I shook my head and pointed toward the leather tote bag resting against the wall. "No, I feel perfectly fine. I just need you to hand me my work laptop from that bag." She looked at me with deep confusion, clearly wondering why a woman who had just given birth less than 12 hours ago wanted to look at a computer screen. "I am just going to handle the hospital deposit so we do not have to deal with the billing department later," I explained, offering a reassuring smile. She nodded, retrieved the heavy silver laptop, and placed it carefully on my lap. I opened the laptop and watched the familiar glowing logo illuminate my face. As a senior forensic accountant for one of the largest financial firms in the country, tracing hidden assets and exposing corporate fraud is my everyday reality. I spend my entire professional life hunting down executives who believe they can outsmart the banking system by moving millions through shell companies and fake vendor accounts. I track every single digit, every hidden fee, and every encrypted transfer with absolute ruthless precision. My brain is hardwired to notice anomalies that ordinary people miss completely. I navigated to our primary banking portal, typing in the security credentials to access the joint savings account Brandon and I shared. We had spent the last 2 years aggressively building this specific account, cutting back on our personal expenses to ensure we had a massive financial safety net for our child. We called it our maternity fund. It was designed to cover the hospital deposit, the out-of-pocket medical deductibles, the nursery renovations, and a full year of unpaid maternity leave so I could stay home with our baby. The last time I checked the balance exactly 1 month ago, we had successfully saved $85,000. I clicked the authentication prompt on my phone and the dashboard instantly loaded on my screen. I navigated directly to the Savings tab, fully expecting to see that comforting five-figure number sitting safely in the designated column. Instead, my eyes locked onto a number that made my heart physically skip a beat. The balance displayed in bold black text was exactly $42.15. I blinked hard, assuming the hospital network was glitching, or the banking application had timed out and loaded an error screen. I manually refreshed the browser, clearing the cache and logging back into the secure portal. The screen loaded again, displaying the exact same horrifying figure, $42.15. My husband had not just abandoned his heavily pregnant wife to go drink margaritas on a luxury beach. He had entirely gutted the financial security we had built for our newborn son, leaving us with absolutely nothing to pay the impending medical bills. A cold wave of adrenaline rushed through my veins, completely erasing any lingering physical exhaustion from the delivery. He thought he could steal from a forensic auditor. My fingers began to fly across the laptop keyboard with terrifying speed and absolute precision. I immediately bypassed the basic consumer interface and pulled up the detailed transaction history, downloading the raw data logs into a specialized spreadsheet software I used for corporate investigations. I was no longer looking at my personal bank account. I was looking at a crime scene, and I was going to secure every single piece of digital evidence before the perpetrator even realized he was being hunted. I traced the transfer histories line by line. The $85,000 had not been withdrawn in one massive lump sum, which would have triggered an automatic fraud alert and required verbal confirmation from both account holders. Instead, the money had been systematically siphoned out in carefully calculated increments over the last 3 weeks. Brandon had executed multiple wire transfers, moving amounts perfectly structured to fly just under the bank's manual review threshold. I tracked the routing numbers and pulled the IP logs attached to the digital authorizations. He had initiated every single transfer from his office computer at his real estate firm. But the money did not go to his personal checking account or a domestic travel agency to pay for his luxury vacation. I followed the digital breadcrumbs through two intermediary holding accounts before finding the ultimate destination. The funds had been wired directly into a newly established offshore account located in the Cayman Islands. He had purposely moved the money outside of standard United States legal jurisdiction, believing that creating an international barrier would prevent me from easily freezing or recovering the stolen assets during a messy divorce. He had planned this massive theft meticulously while smiling in my face and painting the nursery. He genuinely believed he had executed the perfect financial crime against his own family. I saved the offshore routing details and exported every single IP log, securing the raw data on my encrypted local drive. The audit had officially begun. The stolen $85,000 was a devastating discovery, but my professional intuition warned me that a thief rarely stops at cash when other liquid assets are readily available. The missing maternity fund was just the very tip of a much larger financial iceberg. I minimized the banking spreadsheet and logged directly into my secure credit monitoring dashboard. I needed to see exactly how far Brandon had gone to finance his sudden desire for a luxurious bachelor lifestyle. The dashboard loaded and a massive glowing red flag immediately dominated the center of my screen. A hard credit inquiry had been pulled against my social security number exactly 14 days ago. My eyes tracked across the data row, identifying the source of the inquiry as a major national mortgage lender. Brandon had submitted a formal application for a $50,000 home equity line of credit, heavily leveraging the equity in the marital home we shared. The sheer audacity of his actions made my chest tighten. He was not satisfied with merely draining our cash reserves. He actively tried to put a lien on the roof over his unborn child's head just to impress his arrogant parents on a tropical island. I clicked through to view the full application documents that had been electronically filed. He had used my personal information, my high credit score, and my extensive employment history to guarantee the loan approval. My hands remained perfectly steady as I downloaded the application file. He thought he was a genius playing the system, but he had severely underestimated the woman he married. The blatant disregard for our family's future was staggering. He had willingly jeopardized everything we had built just to fund a fleeting moment of fabricated high society status. Every keystroke he made was a betrayal. I archived the PDF files into my secure folder, ensuring the evidence was perfectly preserved. As I reviewed the digital paperwork, my initial surge of anger rapidly transformed into cold, calculating amusement. Brandon had indeed attempted the ultimate financial scam, trying to leverage the substantial equity in our marital home for immediate cash. He had filled out every section of the application, flawlessly detailing our combined income and assets. He even went as far as submitting a forged digital signature using a DocuSign account he secretly created under my name. He had copied my electronic signature style perfectly, genuinely believing the automated banking software would process the approval without any human intervention. However, my dear husband possessed a fatal flaw in his grand financial scheme. He severely lacked attention to detail. When I purchased our home 5 years ago, before we were ever married, I did not put the deed under my personal legal name. As a financial professional, I understood the critical importance of asset protection. I had placed the entire property into a highly specialized corporate trust specifically designed to shield real estate from personal liability claims and unauthorized liens. Brandon had lived in that house for years, completely unaware of its actual legal ownership structure. The mortgage lender's automated system instantly flagged a critical discrepancy between his fraudulent application and the county property records. Because the house was legally owned by the corporate trust, any equity withdrawal required a secondary layer of identity verification, including a notarized physical signature from the designated trustee, which was me. The bank's fraud detection algorithms immediately recognized the invalid DocuSign attempt and halted the entire process. They completely rejected his $50,000 loan application within 24 hours of its submission. I stared at the rejection notice displayed on my laptop screen, feeling a profound sense of vindication. His attempt to mortgage our baby's future had failed spectacularly, and the digital footprint of his attempted felony was now permanently recorded on the bank servers. He had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy him entirely. His sheer ignorance of basic corporate law was his absolute undoing. I captured high-resolution screenshots of the automated denial letters verifying the exact timestamps of his criminal failure. The paper trail he created was an absolute masterpiece of self-incrimination. With the home equity loan brutally rejected and the departure date for his luxury vacation rapidly approaching, Brandon had clearly entered a state of absolute desperation. He needed a massive influx of cash to fund the overwater villas, the first-class tickets, and the fine dining experiences his parents demanded. The offshore accounts held our stolen savings, but he needed clean, legitimate credit lines to satisfy the extremely strict booking requirements of the five-star Maldives resort. I kept digging through the linked financial reports and uncovered his frantic pivot. Panicking and entirely out of viable options, Brandon had convinced Gary and Brenda to quietly remortgage their own retirement condo down in Florida. They had secured the necessary capital, but their terrible credit history meant they could not pass the international resort's rigorous financial screening. To bypass the luxury hotel's strict credit checks, Brandon had committed his final catastrophic mistake. He illegally linked my pristine corporate financial profile as the primary guarantor on the international wire transfers, acting as the sole security net for his parents' extravagant spending. He deliberately attached my professional credibility to their reckless debt without my consent. By tethering my name to those international transactions, he had officially crossed the line from domestic dispute into severe federal financial crime. I saved the final batch of wire transfer receipts to my encrypted drive. The puzzle was complete, and my trap was fully set. The breathtaking arrogance required to execute this maneuver was beyond comprehension. He genuinely assumed I would never uncover the unauthorized linkage, or that I would simply absorb the financial liability to avoid a public scandal. He had traded my family's security for a few fleeting moments of manufactured paradise. He had absolutely no idea that my silence was not compliance. It was the calm before his absolute execution. I closed the banking portal and immediately established a secure remote connection to the primary server rack we kept housed in our basement back home. Brandon always fancied himself a tech-savvy individual because he knew how to set up a basic wireless network, but he had absolutely no concept of deep system architecture. He honestly believed that moving a file to the virtual trash bin and clicking empty somehow erased it from the physical hard drive forever. As a forensic auditor, I navigate destroyed data environments daily, and recovering his superficially deleted files took me less than 3 minutes. I ran a quick recovery script targeting his specific user profile and bypassed his ridiculously simple alphanumeric password. On the first attempt, a hidden folder labeled simply as Family Updates appeared on my screen containing hundreds of heavily encrypted email exchanges dating back over 2 years. I initiated a brute force decryption protocol, watching the progress bar steadily climb as I rocked my sleeping son against my chest. When the encryption finally cracked and the plain text messages populated my screen, the sheer toxicity of the contents was physically nauseating. I was reading a meticulously documented timeline of pure hatred directed entirely at me. The emails between my husband and his mother were not casual family updates or normal conversations about weekend plans. They were highly strategic, calculated discussions focused exclusively on my income, my assets, and my perceived flaws. Brenda spoke about me with a level of venom that was deeply disturbing, criticizing everything from my career ambition to my relationship with Nicole and Andre. She mocked my working class roots, calling my professional success a temporary fluke that Brandon needed to capitalize on quickly. Reading her words felt like peering into a dark, polluted well. She did not view me as a daughter-in-law or even as a human being. I was an obstacle, a stepping stone, and a resource to be aggressively mined for the benefit of her own bloodline. The sheer volume of correspondence dedicated to tracking my bonus payouts and stock options proved that this was a coordinated long-term financial ambush. As I scrolled deeper into the recovered inbox, the underlying motive behind the massive $85,000 theft became chillingly clear. Brenda was not just offering unsolicited maternal advice, she was actively coaching my husband on how to commit financial espionage within our marriage. I opened a message string dated just a few days after we announced my pregnancy, and the text was utterly damning. Brenda had written a long, manipulative paragraph specifically targeting Brandon's deeply rooted insecurities about his career and his masculinity. "She makes significantly more money than you, Brandon." She wrote her words dripping with toxic encouragement. "You need to act smart and secure your rightful share of that wealth before this new baby arrives and she tries to use her financial leverage against you. She will absolutely try to control you once she is a mother. You need to siphon that cash quietly and funnel the money to pay off Kevin's debts before the creditors take his car again." Kevin is Brandon's younger brother and a notoriously reckless gambling addict who has spent his entire adult life bouncing from one financial disaster to the next. Gary and Brenda had constantly bailed him out, ruining their own credit in the process. Now I realize they had successfully brainwashed Brandon into believing that stealing his own unborn child's security fund to rescue his degenerate brother was somehow a noble act of family loyalty. Brenda had masterfully twisted the narrative, portraying my hard-earned success as a direct threat to Brandon's manhood. She convinced him that hiding assets was not theft, but rather a necessary defensive maneuver against an overbearing wife. The absolute manipulation was tailored to his massive ego and his desperate lifelong need for his mother's approval. He was willing to sacrifice the financial stability of his own new family to play the hero for a brother who would literally gamble the money away by the end of the month. The most devastating blow came when I opened Brandon's direct reply to his mother's demands. There was no hesitation in his response, no moral conflict, and certainly no concern for my well-being or the future of his son. He had fully embraced the criminal scheme with enthusiastic arrogance. I stared at the screen as his betrayal materialized in stark black text. "Do not worry, Mom," his message read, outlining the very scam I had just finished uncovering. "I already moved the $85,000 safely out of her reach. We will use the new home equity line of credit to fund the entire Maldives vacation for you and Dad. Lauren will not notice a single thing until long after her maternity leave is over. By the time she finally checks the accounts, she will be way too exhausted and busy dealing with the new baby to actually fight me on it. She will just cry and eventually let it go to keep the peace." The ultimate disrespect was laid out plainly before my eyes. He was banking on my maternal exhaustion and my love for our child to force my compliance. He honestly believed that the physical and emotional toll of new motherhood would render me too weak to challenge his massive financial theft. He saw my pregnancy not as a miracle, but as the perfect vulnerability to exploit. He assumed I would prioritize domestic harmony over seeking justice for his crimes. He assumed wrong. I closed the email application and secured the decrypted files into a sterile, tamper-proof digital folder that would hold up in any court of law. My evidence collection was now entirely bulletproof and absolute. The trap was set, and he was eagerly stepping right into it. I closed the heavy silver lid of my laptop with a definitive snap, sealing the digital coffin of my marriage. The soft click of the mechanism echoed loudly in the quiet recovery room, signaling the absolute end of my tolerance. I turned my attention away from the glowing screens and looked down at the tiny, fragile life resting against my chest. My son was still sleeping deeply, completely unaware of the massive financial and emotional hurricane swirling around his very first day on Earth. He looked so incredibly innocent, wrapped in his striped hospital blanket, with his tiny fingers curled into loose fists. As I brushed my thumb across his remarkably soft cheek, a profound, fierce protectiveness surged through my veins, entirely replacing any lingering grief or postpartum exhaustion. I made a silent, unbreakable vow to him, right then and right there. I promised my newborn son that no one would ever view him as an inconvenience or leverage his security for their own selfish greed. I promised him that the toxic manipulative cycle created by Brenda and perpetuated by Brandon ended completely with me. They had genuinely believed that bringing a child into this world would make me soft, vulnerable, and easy to control. They severely miscalculated. Motherhood had not weakened my resolve. It had forged it into an impenetrable weapon. I gently shifted the baby, making sure he was perfectly secure and comfortable before shifting my gaze across the small hospital room. Andre was still standing near the heavy wooden door, maintaining his silent, vigilant watch over us. His arms were crossed over his broad chest, and his dark eyes tracked my every movement, waiting for my final assessment of the data I had just uncovered. I took one last deep, stabilizing breath, locking away the role of the devoted, forgiving wife forever. I was strictly operating as a mother and a forensic accountant now. I looked directly at my brother-in-law, my voice dropping to a low, terrifyingly calm register that immediately commanded his full attention in the quiet room. "Andre," I said, holding his steady gaze without blinking. "Remember that notoriously ruthless high-asset divorce attorney whose classic Mustang you fully restored at your main shop last year? The one who has a reputation for absolutely dismantling fraudulent spouses in court and taking no prisoners during settlement negotiations. I need him right here in this recovery room now." Andre slowly uncrossed his arms, his posture shifting from passive guarding to active engagement. A terrifying predatory smile spread across his face, completely transforming his features. He knew exactly who I was talking about. The lawyer was legendary in our city for his cold, calculating approach to high net worth divorces and his absolute refusal to entertain manipulative stall tactics. He was a legal shark who smelled blood in the water from miles away, and he owed my brother-in-law a massive personal favor for sourcing impossible to find parts for his prized vehicle. "Consider him hired, Lauren," Andre rumbled, his deep voice, vibrating with genuine satisfaction. He pulled his smartphone from his jacket pocket, already scrolling through his priority contacts list. "I will call his personal cell phone right now. He owes me big time, and he loves a case with an airtight paper trail. I will tell him to drop whatever he is doing and bring his emergency filing kit directly to this hospital." Nicole sat up straighter in her chair, her eyes wide with supportive anticipation as she watched us orchestrate the legal strike. We were not just preparing to file standard divorce paperwork. We were actively arming a financial and legal warhead. Andre stepped out into the busy hospital corridor to make the call, his massive frame disappearing behind the heavy door. I gently rubbed my son's back, feeling the steady rhythm of his tiny heartbeat. The hardest part of the emotional separation was already completely over. Now it was purely a matter of precise legal execution and ensuring that Brandon faced the absolute maximum penalty for his staggering financial crimes. The attorney arrived at the hospital ward less than an hour later, striding confidently into my room with a thick leather briefcase and a sharp professional demeanor. He did not offer any empty platitudes or waste time expressing fake sympathy for my situation. Instead, he took one look at the heavily encrypted flash drive containing all the wire transfer logs, offshore routing numbers, and the recovered emails proving premeditated financial theft, and simply nodded with vicious approval. I sat up in my hospital bed using a hard plastic food tray as a makeshift desk, With absolute unyielding certainty, I signed my name across the initial divorce filings, officially terminating my marriage to a coward. Next, I signed the emergency custody orders, ensuring Brandon would have absolutely zero legal right to make decisions regarding our newborn son. Finally, my pen glided across the most critical document of all, a comprehensive financial restraining order that would legally lock him out of any remaining domestic assets. The lawyer carefully gathered the signed documents back into his leather briefcase, snapping the brass locks shut with a satisfying click. He promised to file everything with the family court judge the exact very second the courthouse doors opened in the morning. I stopped him just as he turned toward the exit, raising my hand to halt his departure. "Hold the actual service of these documents," I instructed, my voice steady and entirely devoid of emotion. "Do not serve him officially until I give you the explicit green light. I want him to experience the full weight of his consequences exactly when he feels the most untouchable." The lawyer smirked, recognizing the tactical brilliance of a delayed strike. He agreed to hold the paperwork perfectly ready for my command. I had a few crucial phone calls to make first. I pulled my phone from the hospital tray table and dialed a direct unlisted number I knew by heart. It belonged to the regional director of Apex Bank, a man whose massive corporate accounts I personally audited every single fiscal quarter. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the relaxed tone of someone expecting a friendly professional update. I bypassed the pleasantries, completely shifting instantly into the sharp, authoritative cadence I use during high-stakes financial reviews. I informed him that I was formally reporting a severe, clear-cut case of identity theft and intentional wire fraud involving my personal credentials. I detailed exactly how my husband had systematically drained $85,000 from our joint maternity savings and illicitly funneled it through intermediary routing numbers into an offshore shell account. Then I dropped the heaviest piece of evidence, outlining his failed $50,000 home equity line of credit application and his subsequent desperate maneuver. I explained precisely how Brandon had circumvented international hospitality credit checks by maliciously tethering my pristine corporate financial profile as the primary guarantor on the wire transfers used to remortgage his parents' Florida condominium. I emphasized that he executed these transactions entirely without my knowledge, authorization, or physical presence. The regional director fell completely silent on the other end of the line, absorbing the staggering magnitude of the unauthorized financial movements. He knew my flawless reputation for absolute accuracy and understood immediately that I possessed the exact digital receipts to back up every single claim. The relaxed demeanor vanished from his voice, entirely replaced by the cold, urgent efficiency of a senior banking executive facing a massive breach. He asked me to verbally confirm my identity and security PIN for the official recording. I complied without a single ounce of hesitation, handing him the verbal authority to initiate the absolute destruction of Brandon's financial existence. The bank director did not waste a single second. While keeping me on the secure line, he immediately bypassed standard customer service protocols and directly triggered a Level 1 federal fraud alert across their entire banking network. The massive digital gears of the financial institution began turning with terrifying speed, permanently locking down every single asset connected to my husband's name. Brandon's primary checking accounts, his personal savings, and all of his high-limit premium credit cards were frozen instantly, rendering them absolutely useless pieces of dead plastic. The joint accounts we previously shared were entirely restricted, preventing any further withdrawals, while preserving the precise digital evidence of his earlier theft. But the true masterpiece of this financial lockdown extended far beyond our local domestic branches. Because Brandon had utilized the illicitly guaranteed funds to pay for an extravagant overseas vacation, the director escalated the response to involve international banking protocols. The massive wire transfers Brandon had sent to the five-star resort in the Maldives to secure the overwater villas and cover their exorbitant upfront incidentals were immediately flagged as highly fraudulent transactions. The global banking network operated with incredible and ruthless efficiency, initiating a hard stop on the pending international clearances. The funds that the luxury resort assumed were safely processing were abruptly reversed and locked in a secure transit holding account pending a full criminal investigation. The resort's accounting department would receive the automatic notification of the reversed payments during their routine nightly audit, which was rapidly approaching in their time zone. Brandon was currently sitting on a pristine white sand beach, entirely oblivious to the fact that his financial blood supply had just been completely severed. He had absolutely no access to cash, no working credit lines, and zero ability to pay for the obscenely expensive vacation he had stolen to impress his arrogant parents. The safety net he thought he had so cleverly constructed out of my hard-earned professional credibility was entirely dissolved, leaving him completely exposed and incredibly vulnerable in a foreign country. The sheer magnitude of the freeze ensured he could not simply call a customer service representative to charm his way out of the block. He was officially locked out of the global banking system and permanently branded a severe financial risk by the highest authorities. The immediate financial freeze was a devastating tactical strike, but the subsequent legal ramifications were what would ultimately bury him permanently. By choosing to fraudulently link me as a financial guarantor on international wire transfers without my explicit written consent, Brandon had crossed a massive boundary. This was no longer a simple domestic dispute over marital funds or a messy divorce tactic. His actions constituted a textbook case of severe federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. The bank director solemnly informed me that due to the substantial monetary value involved and the international nature of the transactions, federal regulations required the institution to automatically notify the proper authorities. The bank's internal compliance department was already packaging the digital evidence logs, the forged application timestamps, and the unauthorized wire confirmations to submit directly to federal investigators. The legal dominoes he had foolishly set up were now falling in rapid succession, creating an inescapable chain reaction of criminal liability. He had deliberately manipulated the system to finance a luxury getaway, completely ignoring the severe federal statutes designed to prevent exactly this kind of financial espionage. The authorities would soon possess an airtight, totally flawless paper trail, proving his deliberate malicious intent to defraud both his wife and the banking institution. I thanked the regional director for his incredibly swift, decisive action and completely smoothly ended the call. The heavy machinery of justice was now moving entirely under its own unyielding momentum, rapidly accelerating toward my husband's absolute ruin. He had eagerly wanted to play high-stakes financial games behind my back, and now he was about to face the federal government as his ultimate opponent. There was absolutely no maneuvering out of this incredibly tight corner he had confidently painted himself into. The trap was securely locked shut permanently for good. With the massive banking infrastructure securely locked down, I turned my attention to the specific logistical details of his precious vacation. As a senior executive at my firm, I possessed access to a highly exclusive tier of corporate travel benefits. These were not standard consumer discounts, but heavily negotiated corporate perks, designed strictly for elite partners traveling on authorized company business. I opened a new browser tab and navigated directly to my secure corporate travel portal, utilizing my employee identification number to bypass the standard login screen. The dashboard loaded immediately, populating a comprehensive list of all active travel itineraries linked to my profile. Right at the very top of the active bookings list sat a meticulously detailed reservation for an ultra-luxury resort located in the Ba Atoll of the Maldives. I clicked the confirmation number to expand the billing breakdown, and the sheer audacity of his logistical maneuvering made my jaw tighten. Brandon had completely bypassed the public booking sites and intentionally logged into my corporate portal to secure an incredibly lucrative employee discount. He had specifically reserved their most expensive overwater presidential villa, a massive property that normally commanded a staggering rack rate of $2,000 per night. By illicitly applying my executive corporate code, he had successfully slashed the daily room rate by an impressive 40%, making the extravagant luxury appear somewhat manageable to his arrogant parents. However, Securing the discounted daily rate was only the first part of his scam. To finalize the international reservation, the luxury resort required an exceptionally high incidental deposit to cover potential damages and premium room service charges. Knowing his own personal credit limits were entirely insufficient, he had maliciously linked my elite corporate American Express card as the primary payment method, holding it on file to guarantee the entire 2-week stay. He had essentially forced my employer to inadvertently underwrite his fraudulent family getaway. The sheer entitlement required to steal corporate resources for a personal beach trip was staggering. He had confidently assumed my postpartum recovery would prevent me from reviewing my monthly corporate expense reports until long after he had returned and unpacked his bags. He was entirely wrong, and his stolen tropical paradise was about to become an inescapable financial prison. I captured high-resolution digital screenshots of the complete reservation manifest, ensuring I possessed absolute proof of his unauthorized corporate portal access. The evidence was secured, and it was time to systematically dismantle his luxurious accommodations. I picked up my smartphone and dialed the dedicated Platinum Concierge number located on the back of my corporate card. A highly trained customer service representative answered immediately, greeting me by my formal title and asking how she could assist with my active travel itinerary. I maintained the absolute cold authority of a senior executive addressing a critical security breach. My husband deliberately stole my corporate card details and bypassed the security protocols on my employee travel portal. I stated clearly, my voice crisp and entirely unwavering. I am absolutely not authorizing this current international stay. You need to cancel the applied corporate rate immediately, remove my American Express card from the hotel file, and initiate an instant chargeback for any incidental holds currently pending on the account. The representative typed rapidly, her keyboard clicking loudly through the phone speaker as she pulled up the fraudulent booking. "I am incredibly sorry for this massive security breach, ma'am," she replied, her tone shifting into urgent professional compliance. "I am stripping the corporate discount code from the reservation right now and permanently deleting your payment information from the property management system. Is there anything else you need me to secure?" "Yes." I continued my strategic assault. He also utilized my accumulated executive mileage account to book 3 round-trip first-class flights. "I need you to completely revoke those return flights immediately and flag the passenger profiles for unauthorized mileage redemption. Do not issue any travel vouchers or future flight credits to his name." The representative confirmed the swift execution of my direct orders. The corporate safety net he had so arrogantly relied upon was completely eradicated in under 5 minutes. The elite concierge agent verbally confirmed that the massive digital alterations had been successfully pushed to the international reservation system. "I can guarantee that your corporate assets are entirely completely secured," she assured me before professionally ending the phone call. I set my phone down on the hospital tray table, feeling a deep, profound sense of tactical satisfaction. I understood exactly how luxury international hospitality billing systems operated. The moment the global network refreshed and updated the local property database, the resort's automated accounting software would instantly detect the sudden removal of the primary guarantee card. The system would immediately flag the overwater presidential villa as an unsecured, high-risk reservation. Furthermore, without my exclusive corporate discount code actively applied to the booking, the daily room charge would instantly violently revert back to the astronomical $2,000 rack rate. The hotel management would be automatically alerted to the severe billing discrepancy, and they would swiftly demand immediate full payment in cash or the presentation of a new valid premium credit card to cover the massive outstanding balance. Brandon would be forcefully confronted by the strict resort management the very second the nightly audit completed its cycle. He would confidently hand them his personal credit cards, fully expecting them to clear the exorbitant charges. He had absolutely no idea that every single piece of plastic in his expensive leather wallet had already been permanently frozen by the federal fraud alert I initiated earlier. he would possess absolutely zero means to pay for the incredibly luxurious room he was currently occupying. The meticulously planned trap I had constructed was now firmly snapped shut, trapping him and his arrogant parents on a tiny, isolated island with absolutely no financial resources and completely invalid return tickets. As I sat in the quiet hospital room, calculating the exact moment his financial ruin would finalize, my personal cell phone buzzed with an incoming text message. It was from a close friend who worked as a senior benefits coordinator in the human resources department at Brandon's commercial real estate firm. Her message was frantic and filled with genuine terror. She wrote that Brandon submitted emergency leave paperwork yesterday, saying I had suffered a massive hemorrhage during delivery and was currently on life support. She said the entire executive office was completely devastated and praying for me and the baby. I stared at the illuminated screen, completely paralyzed by the sheer sociopathic depth of his lie. He did not simply request standard vacation time to go to the beach. He knew a sudden 2-week luxury vacation request would be instantly denied given his massive upcoming project deadlines and strict attendance requirements. Instead, he had callously fabricated a horrific medical tragedy involving my absolute near death to explicitly exploit his company's generous, compassionate leave policy. He had weaponized my pregnancy and falsely claimed I was fighting for my absolute life in an intensive care unit just so he could securely continue receiving his full executive salary while sipping premium cocktails on a tropical island. The breathtaking audacity required to submit falsified medical emergency documents to a corporate human resources department was entirely staggering. He was actively defrauding his employer while simultaneously defrauding his wife and stealing from his newborn son. The layered magnitude of his deception was absolutely infinite. I took a deep, steadying breath and replied to my friend, assuring her I was perfectly fine and had just delivered a beautifully healthy baby boy without any major complications. I explicitly instructed her not to mention my reply to anyone else in her department just yet. The sophisticated financial trap I was systematically building required one final, perfectly executed corporate strike to seal his fate completely. I handed my phone to Nicole and asked her to take a quick, high-quality photograph of me securely holding my new son. I adjusted my posture, sitting up completely straight against the stiff hospital pillows, and brushed my hair back so my face was clearly visible and vibrant. I made sure the natural morning light from the window illuminated the healthy flush in my cheeks and the absolute peacefulness of my perfectly healthy sleeping newborn. I smiled a bright, entirely genuine smile, projecting the absolute picture of triumphant recovering motherhood. I meticulously reviewed the image Nicole captured, verifying it completely contradicted the grim life support narrative my husband had so viciously peddled to his executive leadership team. I immediately opened my professional email client on my laptop and began drafting a highly formal message directed straight to the vice president of operations at Brandon's commercial real estate firm. This was a man known for his ruthless adherence to strict corporate integrity and his absolute zero-tolerance policy for any employee deception. I carefully added the director of the Human Resources Department to the carbon copy line, ensuring the communication immediately became a permanent, unassailable part of Brandon's official corporate employment record. I attached the beautiful high-resolution photograph Nicole had just taken of me and my son, serving as undeniable visual proof of my excellent physical condition. Then I navigated to my saved digital files and securely attached the second crucial piece of visual evidence. It was the high-definition screenshot of the geotagged Facebook post Brandon had uploaded just a few short hours prior. The image clearly displayed his smug, smiling face holding a massive frosted margarita alongside Brenda and Gary, with the sparkling, pristine waters of the Maldives stretching out beautifully in the background. The embedded metadata attached to the image confirmed the exact location and timestamp, completely destroying his fraudulent claim of keeping a desperate bedside vigil in a local intensive care unit. My preparation was utterly meticulous, leaving absolutely no room for interpretation or denial. I centered my hands over the keyboard and typed the message with professional surgical precision. Dear management team, I want to extend my deepest personal gratitude for the remarkable concern and sympathy your executive office has shown my family during this time. Please be absolutely assured that my newborn son and I are perfectly healthy and recovering beautifully without any medical complications whatsoever. I deeply believe my husband Brandon may have severely misrepresented his current whereabouts and fabricated a severe medical crisis to fraudulently secure emergency paid leave from your esteemed organization. He is absolutely not at my hospital bedside today. For your official corporate records here is a photograph of him currently drinking premium margaritas in the Maldives on a luxury vacation posted to social media by his mother just a few short hours ago. I trust your Human Resources Department will handle this egregious violation of corporate policy appropriately. I proofread the short, devastating message one final time, verifying the tone was entirely polite, professional, and overwhelmingly destructive. It was the ultimate corporate nuke dropped squarely on the foundation of his career. I hovered my cursor over the send button, feeling a profound sense of absolute finality. I was permanently severing his primary source of income, entirely dismantling his professional reputation, and exposing him as a fraudulent, manipulative liar to the absolute most powerful people in his entire industry. He had deliberately chosen to abandon his wife and steal from his own child to blindly finance an arrogant tropical fantasy. I firmly clicked the mouse, and the email instantly vanished from my outbox directly into the highly monitored inboxes of his superiors. I closed the laptop, placing it safely on the bedside table. The digital guillotine had officially dropped, waiting for execution. Now there was absolutely nothing left to do but wait for the inevitable impact. Every single trap I had meticulously designed was perfectly armed and fully operational. The regional bank director had entirely frozen all financial assets, choking off Brandon's access to both his stolen cash and his personal credit lines. The elite concierge desk had completely revoked his highly subsidized luxury accommodations and entirely voided his expensive return flights. The five-star resort accounting system was currently recalculating his massive pending bill, stripping away the corporate discount and replacing it with the exorbitant daily rack rate. Meanwhile, back in his corporate office, the Human Resources Department and the Vice President of Operations were actively reviewing the irrefutable evidence of his severe employment fraud. He had carelessly constructed his entire arrogant paradise on a highly fragile foundation of stolen money and deceitful promises. I had systematically removed every single pillar supporting his fantasy world. The absolute beauty of this financial ambush was its total invisibility. Brandon was currently half a world away, entirely oblivious to the catastrophic reality hurtling toward him. He likely believed he had successfully outsmarted me, assuming I was too weak and distracted by childbirth to uncover his massive betrayal. He was probably sleeping soundly in his incredibly expensive overwater villa, completely unaware that he was officially a stranded, unemployed fraudster facing severe federal charges. All of the invisible digital wires had been cut, and the massive suspended weight of his consequences was silently plummeting directly toward his head. The absolute quiet of this waiting period was deeply satisfying to my soul. The sheer structural perfection of the trap meant I did not have to lift another finger or utter a single angry word to destroy him completely and permanently. Inside the sterile confines of my hospital recovery room, the atmosphere shifted into a state of profound, tranquil anticipation. I sat up against the crisp white pillows, carefully unbuttoning the top of my hospital gown to nurse my newborn son for the very first time. The quiet, intimate act of feeding my baby stood in sharp, stark contrast to the absolute financial warfare I had just waged across the globe. He latched on perfectly to me, his tiny hands resting softly against my skin. entirely oblivious to the fierce protective measures his mother had just enacted to securely guarantee his future. Nicole walked quietly back into the room carrying a large steaming tray of food she had managed to procure from a premium restaurant down the busy street. She absolutely refused to let me eat the bland, mass-produced hospital cafeteria food after the grueling physical marathon of labor I had just miraculously survived. She arranged the hot meal carefully over my rolling tray table, placing a gentle, loving kiss on my forehead before sitting back down in her vinyl recliner. In the far corner of the room, Andre had taken up his protective position once again. He sat leaning forward with his elbows resting heavily on his knees, meticulously polishing the face of his heavy silver watch with a small microfiber cloth. The rhythmic, steady, circular motion of his large, strong hands was the only movement in the otherwise completely still room. He did not say a single word, but the sharp, intense focus in his dark eyes revealed his absolute readiness for the impending fallout. He was treating the quiet hospital room like a highly secured command center, waiting patiently in the shadows for the arrogant enemy to inevitably detonate the hidden tripwire. The three of us formed an impenetrable united front, an authentic supportive family, functioning in perfect, flawless harmony. There was absolutely no lingering anxiety or fear regarding what would happen next. I took a slow, deliberate bite of the warm, delicious food Nicole brought me, savoring the rich, savory flavors, while keeping my phone positioned securely on the very edge of the mattress. We were totally, completely prepared for the exact moment my husband's privileged world would violently, forcefully collapse around him. I quickly glanced down at the digital clock displayed brightly on my laptop screen. It was currently steadily approaching 2 in the afternoon here in the United States. I rapidly calculated the severe geographical time difference in my head, converting the hours with absolute precision in the remote tropical islands of the Maldives. The time was rapidly approaching 3 in the morning. As a highly seasoned forensic auditor who routinely investigated international corporate hospitality accounts, I knew exactly and flawlessly how luxury resort billing systems successfully operated. Every single premium hotel across the entire globe utilizes automated property management software that runs a mandatory financial process known as the night audit. This highly specific, rigid accounting procedure carefully balances the daily ledgers, posts the newly incurred room charges, and systematically authorizes every single credit card held securely on file for all of their actively registered guests. The exclusive Maldives resort ran their automated night audit at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning local time without fail. The very second that digital clock struck the hour, the hotel's central server would automatically attempt to authorize the astronomical daily room rate and the accumulated luxury incidentals against the payment method Brandon had initially provided. It would violently hit the impenetrable brick wall of my revoked corporate guarantee and the hard federal fraud freeze permanently placed on his personal accounts. The automated system would immediately register a critical catastrophic payment failure. Urgent red flags would instantly flash across the glowing screens of the resort's night managers, forcefully alerting them to a massive unsecured debt occupying their absolute most expensive presidential villa. I watched the minutes tick by on my screen, feeling the adrenaline slowly build in my chest. The inescapable mathematical certainty of the situation was absolutely beautiful. The digital reckoning was precisely scheduled, and it was arriving in exactly 10 very short minutes. The absolute silence of my hospital recovery room was finally broken at exactly 3:15 in the morning Maldives local time. The bright digital display on my laptop screen had just clicked over, confirming the passage of those agonizingly slow final minutes when the sudden harsh buzzing of my cell phone violently shattered the quiet tension. The screen lit up with a brilliant, blinding glow, casting long, harsh shadows across the sterile white sheets of my bed. It was an incoming FaceTime video call from my husband. I stared down at his name flashing across the glass screen, feeling the sharp, heavy thud of my own heartbeat pounding fiercely against my ribs. I did not immediately reach for the device. Instead, I sat perfectly still, allowing the device to vibrate loudly against the hard plastic tray table. I let it ring once. The shrill electronic chime echoed off the walls, drawing the immediate sharp attention of both Nicole and Andre. I let it ring a second time, allowing the agonizing suspense to build on his end of the connection. He was undoubtedly standing halfway across the world, staring at his own screen in a state of absolute pure terror, praying desperately that his reliable, obedient wife would pick up and instantly fix his catastrophic problem. I took one final deep, calming breath, completely detaching myself from any lingering emotional connection to the man I had married. I was no longer his safety net or his financial savior. I was his executioner. With a smooth, deliberate motion, I reached out and swiped the green accept button on the screen, angling the camera perfectly so he could see the cold, clinical background of my hospital room. The video feed connected instantly, bridging the massive geographical gap between my sterile reality and his collapsing tropical fantasy. The trap had officially sprung, and the prey was now securely caught in the incredibly tight digital snare I had so meticulously constructed to ensure his total destruction. I stared directly into the camera lens perfectly, ready to watch the spectacular and devastating end of his world. Brandon's pale face immediately filled the glowing glass screen, and the sheer magnitude of his absolute panic was beautifully captured in high definition. He was sweating profusely, heavy drops of perspiration rolling down his forehead and soaking into the collar of his expensive designer polo shirt. His eyes were wide and frantic, darting wildly around his immediate surroundings. Through the camera lens, I could clearly see the background of the opulent resort lobby, a massive open-air architectural masterpiece featuring soaring bamboo ceilings and perfectly polished teak floors. However, the luxurious tropical ambiance was entirely shattered by the intense, chaotic scene unfolding directly behind his shoulder. My mother-in-law, Brenda, was standing near the grand mahogany reception desk, clutching a lavish floral silk robe tightly around her waist. Her meticulously maintained aristocratic facade had completely evaporated. She looked absolutely terrified, her face pale and drawn, as she aggressively argued with a tall, incredibly stern-looking hotel night manager who was holding a thick stack of printed billing invoices. The manager's rigid posture and highly uncompromising expression made it abundantly clear that the luxury resort was treating them not as valued elite guests, but as severe flight risks. Brandon grabbed his phone with both hands, bringing the camera dangerously close to his flushed, panicked face. "Lauren," he gasped, his voice cracking with a high-pitched, desperate hysteria that I had never once heard from him before in all our years together. "What is going on? All of my credit cards are declining. Every single one of them is completely locked. The hotel is demanding $25,000 upfront in cash right this second because your corporate card was suddenly removed from the system file. They are literally holding our passport securely behind the front desk and threatening to call the local island police if we do not produce a valid payment method immediately. You have to call your bank and fix this massive catastrophic misunderstanding right now before they actually arrest us." I could see the desperation swimming in his wide, frightened eyes as he pleaded for my rescue. I stared back at his trembling, desperate face through the clear digital connection, maintaining an expression of completely blank, unyielding indifference. I did not flinch or offer a single syllable of immediate comfort. The visual juxtaposition between the two of us was incredibly stark and entirely profound. On his end of the camera, there was absolute spiraling chaos fueled by sudden severe financial ruin and the very real threat of international legal consequences. He was practically vibrating with pure, unadulterated terror, his entire privileged reality violently collapsing around him in a humid, tropical lobby. On my end, there was nothing but a chilling, quiet serenity. I sat perfectly still in my sterile hospital bed, the soft, rhythmic breathing of our newborn son resting peacefully against my chest, serving as my only metronome. I projected the cold, calculated detachment of a seasoned auditor who had successfully balanced a highly complicated ledger, leaving zero room for any margin of error. Andre leaned forward slightly in his vinyl chair, gripping the armrest tightly as he silently watched the magnificent destruction unfold on the screen. Nicole stood perfectly still beside my bed, her protective gaze locked onto the man who had so callously abandoned us just 24 hours ago. Brandon frantically wiped the sweat from his eyes entirely, unable to comprehend my absolute silence. He expected me to jump into action, to frantically dial the banking executives, and rapidly deploy my corporate resources to rescue him from the catastrophic consequences of his own arrogant theft. He genuinely believed his obedient, supportive wife would blindly save him without asking a single question. He was entirely and completely wrong. My chilling serenity securely set the ultimate stage for the final, inescapable climax. The trap was locked, and the heavy blade was finally ready to drop. "Lauren, please, you have to call the regional director right now." Brandon begged, his voice escalating into a frantic shriek that echoed across the expansive resort lobby. "You know the banking executives personally. Just tell them this is a huge mistake and authorize a temporary lift on the fraud alert so I can clear this immediate invoice. They are going to throw my parents out into the street." I held the phone steady, maintaining a perfectly level gaze as I watched his total desperation unfold. "I did call the regional director, Brandon," I replied, my voice echoing with icy precision through the quiet hospital room. "I called him specifically to report the $85,000 you systematically stole from our newborn baby's maternity fund." I watched the color rapidly drain from his already pale face. As the crushing realization hit him, his eyes darted nervously as his brain scrambled to comprehend the magnitude of his exposure. "And I also made sure to report the highly illegal $50,000 home equity line of credit you attempted to open." I continued, mercilessly driving the final nail into his financial coffin. "The bank flagged your forged digital signature immediately. Since you carelessly linked my corporate financial profile to authorize the wire transfers for your parents' Florida condominium remortgage, you officially crossed a very severe boundary." "I do not handle international wire fraud investigations, Brandon. The Federal Bureau of Investigation handles wire fraud, and the bank has already submitted their entire digital evidence log directly to the authorities. You did not just steal from your family. You deliberately committed federal financial crimes to pay for your luxury vacation." His jaw dropped open as the absolute reality of his criminal liability crashed down upon him, crushing his arrogant facade into dust. He stood completely frozen, unable to form a single coherent sentence, as his entire privileged world rapidly disintegrated before his very eyes, leaving him stranded and exposed. He suddenly realized the scope of his monumental failure, knowing he could never outsmart a forensic auditor. Suddenly, Brenda violently shoved her son aside, forcing her furious face into the camera frame. Her perfectly manicured aristocratic image was entirely gone, replaced by the frantic rage of a woman losing control of her fabricated high society status. "You ungrateful brat!" she screamed, her shrill voice slicing through the audio connection. "Fix this catastrophic mess right now. We are highly respected people, and this hotel manager is treating us like common criminals. They are threatening to call the local island police and have us arrested for defrauding a luxury property. You are tearing this family apart over a simple misunderstanding." I looked at the woman who had spent years making me feel completely worthless, who had actively coached my husband to siphon away my hard-earned money to bail out his degenerate brother. A faint, cold smile slowly touched the corners of my mouth. I leaned slightly forward, bringing my face closer to the screen so she could see the absolute lack of mercy in my eyes. "You wanted a peaceful family vacation completely without the heavy burden of a crying infant, Brenda," I said, quoting the exact toxic text message she had sent to Brandon just hours earlier. "You specifically said this trip was exactly what you needed to relax before dealing with my constant complaining. Well, you got exactly what you wanted. You are absolutely free from my presence and entirely free from your grandson. Enjoy your perfect tropical paradise." I watched Brenda gasp for air, completely stunned that I had read her private, vicious messages. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out as the sheer horror of her exposed manipulation rendered her completely speechless. Beside me, Andre let out a low rumble of dark satisfaction, perfectly content to watch the arrogant woman finally face the severe consequences of her own ruthless greed. She had demanded a child-free luxury getaway, and I had simply obliged her request by cutting off the very financial lifeline that made her arrogant lifestyle possible. She was permanently trapped in her own shallow nightmare. Brandon shoved his mother out of the view of the camera, desperately reclaiming the screen. His previous arrogant demeanor had entirely dissolved into pure pathetic begging. "Lauren, please, you cannot just leave us completely stranded out here in the middle of the ocean," he pleaded, tears actually welling up in his terrified eyes. "The international airline concierge just informed us that our return tickets are completely invalid because you revoked the corporate mileage account. We literally have absolutely no money, no working credit cards, and no valid flights home. How are we supposed to get back to the United States?" I looked at the coward I had mistakenly married the man who had willingly walked out the front door while I was collapsing from the blinding pain of labor, just so he could drink cocktails on a white sand beach. He wanted me to save him from the exact situation he had meticulously engineered through his own fraud and deception. I felt no pity, no remorse, and absolutely no lingering affection for the pathetic fraudster crying on the screen. You wanted to prioritize a luxury family vacation over the birth of your only son. I stated clearly, my voice echoing with an absolute chilling finality. That is the price you pay. Without waiting for another useless excuse or frantic apology, I firmly pressed the red button, ending the video call instantly. The hospital room returned to its profound, peaceful quiet. I immediately opened my phone settings and permanently blocked Brandon, Brenda, and Gary from ever contacting my number again. I locked the device and placed it face down on the tray table. The heavy blade had completely severed his lifeline forever, securing my absolute freedom from their toxic grasp. The immediate fallout of their tropical exile was broadcast directly to us through a series of frantic voicemails left on Andre's cell phone and highly public social media meltdowns. Since I had permanently blocked their numbers, Brandon desperately tried to reach my brother-in-law, hoping Andre would somehow intervene. Andre placed his phone on the hospital tray table and played the audio messages out loud for Nicole and me to hear. The first voicemail captured the sheer chaotic indignity of their eviction from the $2,000 a night overwater presidential villa. Through the distorted audio connection, we could hear the heavy thumping of expensive luggage rolling roughly across the wooden boardwalks. Resort security guards had officially arrived at their pristine suite, demanding immediate departure since the massive bill remained unpaid. Brandon's voice was breathless and panicked as he pleaded with Andre to wire them emergency funds. He described how the uncompromising security staff stood over them with crossed arms, actively rushing them to pack their designer clothes into their suitcases. The second voicemail was recorded an hour later, featuring the harsh background noise of the humid outdoor reception area. Brenda could be heard weeping loudly in the background, complaining bitterly about the suffocating tropical heat ruining her blowout. They had been aggressively escorted out of their air-conditioned paradise and forcefully deposited into the open-air lobby. Brandon begged Andre to explain why I was doing this to them, claiming they were completely stranded in paradise, with absolutely no access to food or basic amenities. He painted a pathetic picture of his arrogant family, reduced to sitting miserably on their stacked Louis Vuitton luggage, sweating profusely in the oppressive island humidity. A quick search of the resort's location tag on Instagram revealed a public video capturing the exact moment of their eviction. The short clip showed Brandon frantically waving his useless credit cards at the hotel staff while Gary pointed his finger at a security guard. The pristine turquoise ocean sparkled beautifully behind them, serving as the ultimate mocking backdrop to their sudden, devastating homelessness. They were trapped with absolutely zero financial resources to their name and facing imminent local police action for actively defrauding a luxury international hospitality property. The toxic family dynamic rapidly collapsed into sheer internal cannibalism. The third voicemail Andre played for us was entirely dominated by the sound of vicious infighting. The mask of wealthy, sophisticated unity had completely melted away under the intense pressure of impending arrest. Gary was screaming at the top of his lungs, his voice cracking with unhinged rage as he viciously attacked his own son. He completely berated Brandon for foolishly dragging them into this massive, fraudulent scheme and utterly failing to control his own wife. "You promised me she would just pay the bill, you incompetent fool!" Gary bellowed into the background of the audio recording. "I remortgaged my only retirement home for this disaster, and now I am going to end up in a foreign prison because of your absolute stupidity." Brenda immediately jumped into the fray, but instead of defending her golden child, she aggressively turned her venomous panic directly onto her husband. She shrieked that a real man would always have emergency cash reserves securely hidden away for situations exactly like this. She viciously blamed Gary for his previous failed business ventures, claiming his lifelong financial incompetence was the absolute sole reason they were currently suffering such a profound public embarrassment. The audio captured the stunning reality of their shallow existence. They were a family entirely bound together by shared greed and malicious manipulation rather than any actual loyalty or love. The moment the stolen money ran out, they instantly violently tore each other to shreds, attempting to save themselves from the legal consequences. Brandon sobbed into the phone receiver, desperately begging Andre to just send $10,000 to appease the angry hotel management and stop them from calling the local authorities. He was absolutely terrified, crying that the resort manager had already dialed the police precinct and local officers were currently en route to the massive open-air lobby to arrest them all right now without any delay whatsoever, entirely permanently today. The ultimate public humiliation unfolded in full view of the resort's elite clientele. Another wealthy tourist on vacation had recognized the escalating drama in the lobby and began live streaming the incredibly pathetic spectacle directly to a popular travel forum. We watched the high-definition video from the quiet comfort of my hospital room. The local island police had officially arrived, stepping into the luxury reception area in crisp uniforms. The stern hotel manager stood beside them holding the massive unpaid invoice. To completely avoid being handcuffed and physically dragged to a foreign jail cell for blatant hotel fraud, the high-class family was violently forced to liquidate their remaining personal assets right there on the spot. The video showed Brandon with trembling hands slowly unbuckling the heavy gold Rolex from his wrist, the very same watch his mother had bought him to celebrate his unearned promotion. He handed the expensive timepiece over to the uncompromising manager. Gary was forced to surrender his platinum wedding band and his premium diamond-encrusted cufflinks. Brenda wept hysterically, clutching her chest as she was ordered to unfasten her precious diamond tennis bracelet and securely hand over her vintage pearl earrings. The wealthy elite tourists lounging nearby in their pristine white resort wear watched the entire degrading transaction with absolute disgusted fascination. The family that had so arrogantly prided themselves on their superior social status was now publicly stripping off their jewelry, like desperate criminals paying a ransom just to cover the extensive room damages and the exorbitant unpaid nightly rate. They were left with absolutely nothing but the sweaty, wrinkled clothes on their backs, and the stark, terrifying realization that their luxurious tropical paradise had officially transformed into a completely humiliating, inescapable nightmare that would permanently ruin their arrogant, entitled lives forever today. With his designer jewelry surrendered, and the immediate threat of a foreign jail cell temporarily paused, the crushing reality of their complete geographical isolation finally set in. Brandon was entirely stranded on an island thousands of miles away from the United States, with absolutely zero means of securing safe passage back. His smartphone had lost cellular service hours ago when his primary carrier shut off the deeply overdrawn international data plan. Desperate and completely cornered, he approached the stern hotel manager and humiliated himself further by begging to borrow the resort's official lobby telephone. He needed to make one highly urgent international call to his commercial real estate firm. He dialed the direct private extension of the vice president of operations, praying the senior executive was still in the office during the late afternoon hours back in the States. The line clicked, and the familiar gruff voice answered. Brandon gripped the heavy plastic receiver with shaking, sweaty hands and immediately launched into a frantic, pathetic explanation. He completely omitted the massive fraud and the stolen corporate perks, instead weaving a fabricated tale of sudden severe banking errors and unexpected extreme travel emergencies. He begged his boss for an immediate emergency salary advance, pleading for the company to urgently wire enough corporate funds to purchase 3 basic economy tickets home. He promised to work double shifts and forfeit his entire annual bonus just to secure the crucial cash transfer. He assumed his position as a favored project manager would grant him ultimate clemency and immediate financial rescue. He genuinely expected the firm to blindly protect their investment in his career and wire the desperate funds directly to the hotel concierge without asking any difficult questions. He held his breath, waiting for his powerful boss to offer a swift corporate bailout today. The heavy silence on the other end of the international connection was absolutely deafening. When the vice president of operations finally spoke, his voice was completely devoid of any professional warmth or standard corporate courtesy. It was incredibly cold, slicing through the static of the long-distance line with lethal precision. "You have an incredible amount of nerve calling this office to ask for company money, Brandon." The senior executive growled, his anger completely unfiltered. "You looked me directly in the eye yesterday and submitted falsified emergency leave paperwork claiming your wife had suffered a massive catastrophic hemorrhage during childbirth. You explicitly told the Human Resources Department that she was fighting for her life on a ventilator in the intensive care unit. We authorized a fully paid emergency leave of absence because we genuinely believed you were enduring an unimaginable family tragedy." Brandon tried to stammer out a pathetic defense, but the executive immediately cut him off, shutting down the lies completely. "Do not even attempt to speak right now," the boss roared, making Brandon physically flinch back from the receiver. "Your wife contacted me directly this afternoon. She forwarded a beautiful photograph of herself and your perfectly healthy newborn son recovering wonderfully in the maternity ward. Furthermore, she generously provided this office with the geo-tagged social media picture of you drinking premium margaritas on a luxury beach alongside your parents. The sheer sociopathic audacity required to use your wife's supposed near-death experience to scam this company out of paid vacation time is utterly repulsive. We have a zero-tolerance policy for severe ethical breaches and deliberate employee fraud." Brandon gripped the front desk, gasping for air, as his professional world violently crumbled. "You told us your wife was on life support while you were drinking on a beach," the executive stated with absolute chilling finality. "You are officially fired for gross misconduct effective immediately. The Human Resources Department is mailing your formal termination papers and your final heavily penalized paycheck to your home address right now. We are also legally reporting your fabricated medical claims to the State Labor Board for severe benefits fraud. Do not ever attempt to contact this firm, me, or any of our employees ever again." The line went completely dead, emitting a harsh dial tone that echoed loudly in Brandon's ear. The heavy plastic receiver slowly slipped from Brandon's trembling fingers, clattering loudly against the polished mahogany reception desk. His physical body simply gave out under the crushing astronomical weight of his absolute failure. His knees completely buckled, and he violently collapsed directly onto the pristine hardwood floor of the open-air lobby. He sat there in a pathetic heap, pulling his knees tightly to his chest while gasping for oxygen in the humid tropical air. The grand, majestic illusion of his highly successful, privileged existence was now entirely and permanently shattered into microscopic pieces. He possessed absolutely no job to return to, having completely destroyed a lucrative real estate career through his own sociopathic deception. He possessed absolutely no money, having deliberately stolen from his newborn son, only to have his entire financial network completely frozen by fierce federal investigators. He possessed absolutely no wife, having callously abandoned the one highly intelligent woman who had actively built and managed the successful foundation of his entire adult life. He was now just an unemployed, disgraced criminal sitting on the floor of a foreign hotel lobby, facing a massive incoming federal wire fraud investigation. Brenda and Gary stared down at their broken, weeping golden child, finally realizing the total devastating reality of their situation. There was no hidden safety net left to catch them, and no working-class daughter-in-law left to ruthlessly exploit. They were entirely stranded, entirely broke, and entirely ruined. I watched the final moments of the live stream before the wealthy tourist ended the broadcast, feeling a profound, absolute sense of total closure. The brutal, meticulous execution of my plan was completely finished, leaving them in a hell of their own making. My vengeance was now utterly and flawlessly complete today, with absolutely no money remaining, and the local island police officially threatening them with imminent arrest for defrauding a luxury hospitality property. Brandon was violently forced to swallow every single ounce of his massive ego. He dragged himself to the small administrative office near the resort lobby and utilized a landline to contact the United States Embassy. The arrogant real estate executive who had confidently stolen $85,000 to fund a tropical fantasy was now reduced to practically begging a highly skeptical consular officer for a government bailout. The embassy staff treated him exactly like a reckless, irresponsible backpacker, loudly explaining the strict, humiliating terms of an emergency repatriation loan. Brandon had to sign binding federal promissory notes guaranteeing the immediate repayment of the travel funds upon returning to American soil, adding yet another layer of massive, inescapable debt to his completely ruined financial profile. Because the emergency loan only covered the absolute bare minimum required for secure international transit, the embassy booked the family on the absolute cheapest, most punishing flight itinerary physically available on the global network. There were absolutely no direct flights, no comfortable premium economy upgrades, and certainly no luxurious airport lounges to hide in. Their grueling route back to the United States required 3 separate massive layovers in highly congested regional airports, including a devastating 14-hour wait on hard plastic chairs in a freezing terminal. They were violently stripped of their priority boarding passes and forcefully shoved into the absolute lowest tier of standard commercial travel. The family that had proudly paraded their stolen wealth just 48 hours earlier was now helplessly clutching basic economy boarding passes, completely trapped by their own spectacular failure. Gary stared blankly at the harsh fluorescent lighting of the departure gate, while Brenda hyperventilated into a crumpled paper napkin, completely refusing to accept her new reality. Brandon simply stared at the floor entirely, unable to process the severe magnitude of the nightmare he had actively chosen to create. The deeply humiliating journey back to their completely ruined lives had officially commenced. The return journey instantly transformed into an excruciating 40-hour psychological and physical nightmare. Brenda, and Gary were brutally crammed into the absolute worst middle seats, positioned directly next to the foul-smelling airplane bathrooms at the very back of the commercial aircraft. They were entirely unwashed, severely sleep-deprived, and completely unable to change out of the lightweight tropical resort clothing they had worn during their sudden eviction. The thin linen shirts and bright floral dresses that looked so incredibly chic on a white sand beach now offered absolutely zero protection against the freezing recycled air of the massive cabin. Brenda shivered violently, wrapping her bare arms around her chest, as the stark reality of her massive social downfall finally set in. Her perfectly maintained aristocratic facade was entirely broken into microscopic pieces. She wept continuously for the entire duration of the marathon flight, her expensive designer makeup heavily smeared in dark, chaotic circles around her completely bloodshot eyes. She loudly blamed Gary for his financial incompetence and bitterly cursed Brandon for getting caught completely ignoring her own massive role in orchestrating the vicious theft. The other exhausted passengers glared at them with severe annoyance, entirely unsympathetic to the wailing woman in the ruined silk dress. Instead of the gourmet chef-prepared meals and unlimited premium champagne, they had arrogantly anticipated they were served incredibly bland, stale microwave dinners in small tinfoil containers. Gary ate his mushy pasta in complete stony silence, his jaw tightly clenched as he forcefully processed the total catastrophic loss of his Florida retirement home. Brandon sat wedged tightly between two angry strangers, staring blankly at the tiny scratched seatback screen directly in front of his face. The agonizing lack of legroom, the constant loud crying of tired infants, and the overwhelming smell of jet fuel forced him to endure every single agonizing second of his brutal punishment. Every sudden bout of severe turbulence served as a sharp physical reminder of his absolute total failure and the massive legal storm waiting back home. When the heavy landing gear finally slammed against the concrete runway in the United States, the physical impact jolted the severely exhausted family back to stark, harsh reality. They slowly stumbled through the busy international arrivals terminal, completely drained of all their previous arrogant entitlement. They possessed absolutely no money for a private luxury car service, forcing them to explicitly rely on a cheap public shuttle bus to transport them back to the quiet, wealthy suburbs. They were utterly broke, physically filthy, and completely furious at the devastating turn of events. However, despite facing total financial ruin and severe incoming federal investigations, Brandon still stubbornly clung to a massive, deeply ingrained delusion. As he stared out the dirty window of the moving shuttle bus, his arrogant mind immediately began formulating a pathetic manipulation strategy. He genuinely convinced himself that he could simply walk right back into the pristine marital house he had recently tried to exploit and easily charm his way out of the massive disaster. He firmly believed that Lauren, having just delivered their newborn son, would be incredibly vulnerable, desperately lonely, and eagerly waiting for his return. He planned to walk straight through the front door, drop heavily to his knees, and deliver a highly practiced fake apology, completely blaming his mother for the entire illegal financial scheme. In his incredibly twisted sociopathic logic, he assumed his forgiving wife would immediately lift the severe banking restrictions and flawlessly restore his completely comfortable, privileged life. He truly thought his status as the father of her child granted him absolute permanent immunity from severe legal consequences. He fully expected to peacefully sleep in his own warm bed tonight, entirely oblivious to the massive, heavily armed welcome committee actively waiting for him on the other side of his front door. Brandon stepped off the cheap public shuttle at the edge of our pristine suburban neighborhood, dragging his heavy designer suitcase behind him. His parents had remained on the bus, heading toward their own impending disaster, but Brandon walked briskly down the familiar tree-lined street with a renewed sense of arrogant purpose. As he approached the manicured front lawn of the marital house he had so recently attempted to leverage, he completely adjusted his wrinkled collar and practiced his most charmingly pathetic facial expression. He walked up the concrete driveway, fully anticipating a tearful reunion where he would expertly manipulate my postpartum vulnerability to regain absolute control of his comfortable life. He took a deep breath. He confidently stepped onto the front porch and reached for the sleek electronic smart lock mounted on the heavy oak door. He casually punched in his standard 4-digit security code, expecting the familiar mechanical click of the deadbolt releasing. Instead, the keypad emitted a harsh, loud beep and flashed a brilliant warning red. Frowning in sudden, massive annoyance, he tried his secondary backup code, assuming the digital system was simply experiencing a temporary network error. The keypad flashed bright red a second time, completely denying him entry to his own home. A flash of hot, irrational anger instantly replaced his manufactured remorse. He genuinely believed I was simply throwing a petty childish tantrum by temporarily locking him out to punish him for the luxury vacation. He absolutely refused to accept that his domestic access had been permanently securely revoked. He balled his hand into a tight fist and began aggressively pounding on the thick wooden door, shouting my name loud enough for the entire quiet neighborhood to clearly hear. He demanded that I open the door immediately and stop playing foolish emotional games, completely unaware that every single strike of his fist against the wood was being securely recorded by the brand new high-definition security cameras installed just yesterday to guarantee my absolute protection. The heavy wooden door finally swung inward violently, breaking his rhythm of aggressive pounding. Brandon instantly dropped his raised fist and opened his mouth, perfectly prepared to deliver his highly rehearsed fake apology directly to his emotionally fragile wife. The manipulative words died instantly in his dry throat. Instead of finding me weeping quietly in the foyer with our newborn son, he found himself staring directly into the massive, unyielding chest of my brother-in-law. Andre stood firmly, squarely in the center of the doorway, his imposing 6 feet 3 inches frame completely blocking any unauthorized entry into my secure sanctuary. His dark eyes locked onto Brandon with an absolute chilling intensity, radiating a fierce physical protectiveness that made the cowardly real estate manager instinctively take a trembling step backward. Andre slowly stepped slightly to the side, silently revealing the massive, devastating reality of the terrifying welcome committee actively waiting inside the bright hallway. Flanking Andre on the left stood the impeccably dressed, notoriously ruthless, high-asset divorce attorney I had officially retained at the hospital. The legal shark wore a razor-sharp custom suit and held a remarkably thick stack of official legal documents tightly in his hands, projecting an aura of absolute uncompromising destruction. The true nightmare for Brandon, however, stood directly behind the formidable lawyer. Positioned clearly inside the grand foyer of his former home were two fully uniformed, heavily armed city police officers. The officers stood with their hands resting casually near their dark utility belts, their professional expressions completely stern and highly observant. The sheer overwhelming magnitude of the severe legal ambush violently crashed down upon Brandon, paralyzing him entirely on the concrete front porch. He could not breathe. The pathetic, arrogant illusion that he could simply talk his way out of federal financial crimes and malicious marital theft evaporated instantly in the cold afternoon air. He was completely surrounded, absolutely outmatched, and totally cornered by a specialized strike team perfectly designed to systematically execute his absolute permanent ruin. The two police officers stepped forward decisively, completely closing the short distance between the foyer and the paralyzed man standing on the concrete porch. They officially confirmed his legal identity before forcefully handing him a thick sealed manila envelope. The officer clearly stated that he was being officially served with a formal summons regarding severe federal financial fraud and aggravated identity theft directly related to the unauthorized domestic banking wires. Before Brandon could even physically process the massive criminal charges securely resting in his trembling hands, the ruthless divorce attorney immediately stepped forward to deliver the second devastating blow. The lawyer aggressively slapped a second heavy stack of documents directly against Brandon's chest, forcing him to instinctively grab them. He coldly informed the ruined executive that he was officially served with comprehensive divorce filings, full termination of parental rights, and an immediate emergency protective order legally banning him from coming within 500 feet of me or my son ever again. Brandon stood completely, utterly broken under the astronomical weight of the severe legal papers, physically shaking as he stared blankly at the badge numbers and official court seals verifying his total permanent destruction. He opened his mouth to weakly protest, to desperately beg for a chance to just speak with me, but Andre immediately shut him down entirely. My brother-in-law stepped aggressively forward, towering over the pathetic, shivering fraudster, casting a massive dark shadow completely over him. Andre looked down with absolute disgusted authority and delivered the final undeniable knockout blow with chilling, precise clarity. You have exactly 5 minutes to grab your golf clubs from the garage before I physically throw you off this property permanently. Andre growled, his deep voice promising absolute swift violence if his exact orders were ignored. Your time starts right now. In the ensuing months, the heavy wheels of justice ground forward with absolute ruthless efficiency, ensuring that karma completely collected every single one of its outstanding debts. Gary and Brenda had arrogantly assumed their social status would somehow shield them from the catastrophic fallout of their malicious luxury vacation. But the severe federal reality quickly shattered their comfortable retirement. Because Brandon had illegally tied the international wire transfers to their property to secure the massive cash infusion, the banking institution immediately moved to aggressively recover the fraudulent debt. The $50,000 loan they had secretly taken out morphed into a massive financial anchor, dragging them straight down to the bottom of the ocean. Facing imminent foreclosure and the terrifying threat of being named as active co-conspirators in a federal wire fraud investigation, they were violently forced to liquidate their precious Florida condominium. Due to the extreme urgency of the mandatory legal repayment window, they had absolutely zero leverage to negotiate a fair market price. They sold the beautiful beachfront property at a massive, devastating loss, completely wiping out the majority of their lifelong savings in a single afternoon. However, the financial bleeding did not stop with the immediate bank repayment. Because Brandon was facing severe federal charges, he required an incredibly expensive criminal defense attorney to keep him out of a federal penitentiary. Gary and Brenda were forcefully required to empty their remaining depleted retirement accounts to pay the exorbitant legal retainer for their disgraced golden boy. The extravagant, wealthy lifestyle they had so proudly paraded in front of me for years vanished entirely. They were immediately reduced to renting a tiny, dilapidated apartment in a completely undesirable neighborhood, far away from their old country club friends. Their toxic, greedy obsession with maintaining an aristocratic facade had ultimately cost them every single valuable asset they possessed, leaving them entirely broke and utterly humiliated. They had traded their entire financial security just to enjoy a few fleeting days drinking cocktails on a tropical beach. The absolute destruction of Brandon's privileged life was even more spectacular and permanently irreversible. Despite the massive fortune his parents desperately drained to secure him top-tier legal representation, the digital paper trail I had meticulously provided to the authorities was entirely flawless and completely undeniable. Brandon was officially convicted of federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft in federal court. Through a highly restrictive plea deal, he narrowly managed to avoid serving hard time in a federal prison cell, but his ultimate punishment was incredibly severe. The presiding judge handed him 5 grueling years of strict supervised probation alongside a massive, unyielding restitution order. More devastatingly, the felony conviction branded him permanently, entirely obliterating his professional future. The strict regulatory boards permanently revoked his real estate licenses and explicitly banned him from ever working in any capacity within the financial or property management sectors ever again. The arrogant project manager who used to proudly wear expensive tailored suits and loudly brag about his elite corporate connections was forcefully completely expelled from the corporate world. With zero professional references, a severe criminal background, and absolutely no marketable skills outside of the industry that aggressively banished him, Brandon was violently forced to accept the only employment he could physically secure. He now works the late-night drive-through window at a greasy local fast food restaurant, wearing a cheap polyester uniform that smells permanently of stale cooking oil. He lives entirely alone in a cramped, incredibly noisy studio apartment located directly next to a busy commercial train track. The overwhelming burden of his court-ordered restitution payments ensures that almost every single dollar he earns is immediately garnished, leaving him with barely enough cash to buy basic cheap groceries. His former wealthy colleagues completely abandoned him, refusing to even acknowledge his existence when he desperately begged them for small loans. The once arrogant golden boy had fallen completely from his high pedestal, violently crashing into a miserable, desolate reality he could never possibly escape. Despite the absolute finality of their massive legal and financial ruin, Brenda still stubbornly attempted to employ her manipulative tactics one final pathetic time. Exactly 4 months after the dramatic ambush at my front door, a thick, heavily perfumed envelope arrived at my corporate office. Inside was a long, rambling handwritten letter from my former mother-in-law, entirely saturated with fake tears and aggressive victim blaming. She completely ignored the massive financial fraud and the sheer cruelty of abandoning a woman in active labor, choosing instead to portray herself as a heartbroken, tragic grandmother. She desperately begged for a chance to finally meet her precious grandson, claiming that true families should always forgive each other, and that keeping an innocent child away from his loving grandparents was an exceptionally cruel punishment. She genuinely believed she could still weaponize my basic human decency to regain a tiny foothold in my highly successful, peaceful life. I did not shed a single tear, and I certainly did not draft an emotional response. I simply scanned the pathetic letter and securely forwarded the digital file directly to my ruthless divorce attorney. Within 24 hours, he drafted and delivered a severe, highly aggressive cease and desist order via certified mail straight to her miserable new apartment. The legal document explicitly threatened immediate police action and severe harassment charges if she or any member of her ruined family ever attempted to contact me, my son, or my extended family ever again in any capacity. The heavy iron doors slammed completely shut permanently, sealing them out of our bright future. The toxic, manipulative noise that had heavily polluted my life for years was finally completely silenced, leaving behind nothing but pure, unadulterated peace and total, absolute freedom. Today, exactly 1 year after the dark, chaotic nightmare of my delivery day, my everyday reality has transformed into something incredibly beautiful and remarkably peaceful. The scene in my new spacious backyard on a brilliant sunny Saturday afternoon is the absolute perfect picture of joy and stability. The warm, golden sunlight filters beautifully through the large oak trees, casting a vibrant glow across the freshly cut green grass. The rich, savory scent of marinated steaks and roasted vegetables fills the crisp, clean air. Nicole stands confidently at the massive stainless steel gas grill, expertly flipping the food, while laughing loudly at a joke her husband just made. Andre is standing a few feet away, looking completely relaxed, in a simple cotton shirt and denim shorts. His broad, incredibly strong shoulders currently serve as the ultimate playground for my thriving 1-year-old son. My baby boy throws his head back and lets out a bright, echoing belly laugh as Andre bounces him securely up and down. The sound of my child's pure, unadulterated joy rings clearly across the private, fenced yard, completely erasing any lingering shadows from our turbulent beginning. Andre holds his tiny hands with immense gentle care, proving that absolute physical strength is best utilized to protect and uplift the most vulnerable among us. Watching the massive, successful auto shop owner melt into a puddle of smiles for his nephew fills my heart with a profound, overwhelming warmth. This beautiful house represents a completely fresh start, safely purchased entirely under my own name, using the clean, undisputed assets I aggressively protected from my fraudulent ex-husband. There are absolutely no forged documents hiding in the shadows, no toxic in-laws demanding expensive catering, and no cowardly partners planning luxury escapes. There is only the bright, constant, comforting presence of people who genuinely deeply love each other endlessly. I stand comfortably on the wooden deck, holding a glass of iced tea, soaking in the beautiful symphony of my sister's laughter and my son's happy squeals. This is exactly what a true, healthy home is supposed to look like and feel like. I take a step back, leaning comfortably against the sturdy wooden railing of my deck to observe the wonderful people who saved me. As I watch Nicole playfully toss a bright red plastic ball toward Andre and my cheering son, a deep, powerful realization washes over me. For many years, I genuinely believed that family was strictly defined by biology or legally bound by a formal marriage certificate. I had allowed myself to be repeatedly mistreated and financially exploited because I thought enduring a toxic dynamic was just the normal price of keeping a household together. I thought putting up with arrogant, selfish in-laws and a cowardly, manipulative partner was exactly what a dedicated wife was supposed to do. I was entirely wrong. Family is not determined by shared genetics or signed legal contracts stored in a county courthouse. True family is absolutely defined by the people who firmly stand outside your hospital room door, like an impenetrable fortress, when you are screaming in the blinding pain of labor. Family is defined by the individuals who fiercely hold the line when the rest of the world selfishly turns its back on you. It is the sister who sprints through clinical corridors to wipe the cold sweat from your forehead. It is the brother-in-law who furiously guards your sanctuary and expertly connects you with the legal weapons needed to protect your newborn child. Looking at them now, I understand that my wealth is no longer measured by the corporate accounts I audit or the significant offshore trust funds I successfully seized back from a criminal. My true astronomical wealth is measured entirely by the unwavering loyalty of the people standing in my backyard right now. I have absolutely never felt richer, safer, or more deeply secure in my entire 33 years of existence. The severe betrayal that initially threatened to completely destroy my world actually served as the ultimate cleansing fire. It violently burned away the manipulative dead weight I had been blindly carrying and illuminated the solid gold foundation of the people who truly mattered. I do not miss the fake luxury vacations or the constant, exhausting anxiety of wondering when the next financial scam would drop. I trade all of that superficial glamour for this quiet, honest peace every single time. My son will grow up knowing exactly what real, genuine devotion looks like today. I take a final long sip of my sweet iced tea, stepping directly away from the sturdy wooden railing and slowly turning to face you, the incredible audience who has followed my entire journey from that devastating labor ward to this peaceful, gorgeous backyard. My story is not just a tale of fierce financial retribution or a simple, satisfying lesson in strict corporate auditing. It is a fundamental, unwavering truth about establishing strict human boundaries and maintaining personal self-respect. They say a woman is at her most vulnerable right before she gives birth, but they always forget that when you violently push a mother into a corner, she does not just survive. She destroys the empire of anyone who tries to hurt her child. Brandon genuinely believed my pregnancy made me weak, pliant, and easily manipulated. He thought he could steal my hard-earned money, abandon me alone in my absolute darkest hour, and simply smile his way out of the severe federal consequences. Instead, he learned the agonizingly hard way that a woman actively protecting her family's financial future is the absolute most dangerous, unstoppable force on the entire planet. I successfully dismantled his entire arrogant, privileged life, using nothing but the pure truth and the very digital evidence he carelessly left behind. Have you ever had to use cold, hard facts to shut down a toxic family member? Drop your personal story in the comments below right now, and do not forget to subscribe for even more. The unforgettable story of Lauren's harrowing yet triumphant journey offers a profound lesson on the true nature of family and the vital importance of self-reliance. Often society conditions us to believe that family is an unbreakable bond forged solely by blood or legal marriage certificates. We are taught to endure toxic behavior, financial exploitation, or emotional abandonment simply to keep the peace and maintain a picturesque, perfect facade. However, Lauren's experience violently shatters this illusion, revealing that genuine family is defined entirely by loyalty, presence, and unwavering support during our most vulnerable moments. When Lauren was left to face childbirth alone, abandoned by a selfish husband and exploited by greedy in-laws, she did not crumble into the role of a helpless victim. Instead, she recognized that her husband's cowardice was not a reflection of her worth, but a stark exposure of his own character. The profound lesson here is that we must ruthlessly evaluate the people we allow into our inner circle. The individuals who stand by you like a fortress when the world turns its back, just as Andre and Nicole did, are the ones who truly deserve your devotion. Furthermore, the narrative powerfully illustrates that setting ironclad boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary mechanism for survival and self-respect. By utilizing her intellect, emotional control, and professional skills to dismantle her husband's fraudulent empire, Lauren proved that standing up for oneself is the ultimate form of protection. We must learn to permanently stop offering endless grace to those who intentionally and repeatedly cause us harm. Please evaluate the relationships in your life today and actively choose to invest your valuable energy only in the people who truly show up for you when it really matters most.